Hey, this is Lyndon, and yeah, it's nice that you've put some stuff in Maya, so that you're sort of jumping ahead. Although um, uh, I I would argue that Maya is not a design tool. Maya is a tool to execute the designs that you've created. So when you're designing an environment, you should use 2D, tools like hand drawn or Photoshop, gathering reference images for the kind of room that you want. You said in your post there isn't any reference for this image because it's just my imagination. It's really just imagination, but you know, there is reference. You could get images, this table is extremely simple. Like a real table doesn't look like that. A real table has more detail, same with the chair. A chair doesn't really look like that. And so everything is really simplified and doesn't look like doesn't give it a real sense of place. So get reference images, do a sketch of what you want the environment to be like. It's good that you're limiting the area of the environment, like doing a room and doing 2 or 3 sides of the room is the right idea because you don't want to build, we're not making a game. You're not going to be able to walk around and see all parts of it. It only has to be fully detailed from the point of view of the camera. And anything outside of what the camera sees need not be built. So limit the range of the stuff you have to build and then put the detail into that. But don't start in Maya. Start with drawings, start with reference images. And you can have, oh, I have an idea for my imagination. It's a room with a desk and a chair. Fine. What chair? What desk? Whose room? What kind of furniture would this person have? You know, and then look up that furniture and then reproduce that furniture in your model. This is Jeffrey. I think this is a really good collection of reference images. You've got several different views, a few different looks for the kind of environment you want to build. You've got these kind of these floor plans and different views, which could really help with modeling. Although I would say you wouldn't want to build the whole house, just the point of view of the camera that you want to see. So you only need to do that limited environment. I saw you also started in Maya. And here's what you have in Maya. And I think that one really important thing when modeling is a sense of scale. So, when I look at, how thick these things are, um, they look very, very big and thick compared to, say, a reference image. Um, let's use this pot as an example. It's hard to know how big that is. So that's as a sort of a measuring stick. You just sort of imagine how big that kind of little pot over fire might be, and that's as you can see, that's sort of eclipsed by the thickness of this column. Let's go back to your reference image, and I would say that these columns maybe are as thick as that, but um, I would try to go. They just look really big to me, so I might go a little thinner on those. And also just like this big piece right here where this kind of continues on, that I don't think there's anything in the model that looks like that. So, but the other thing is you're jumping ahead with the modeling. Don't try to model now. What I would do is you've got some good reference images. Really narrow down the environment you want to build. What environment, what props, what point of view of the camera. Limit the area you need to build so it's just one point of view. You don't have to flesh out everything in 360 degrees. It just needs to work in, say, 180 degrees. So work on the design, whether you use sketches or more photographs, and kind of really narrow down what you want the space to look like and what you want to be in that space. The images you have are kind of very perfect. What can help with an environment is when it looks a little bit more lived in. So this looks like, something out of I don't know, an interior design magazine or something like that, where there's no there's no sign of someone living here. It looks more like a museum or something like that. So having a few more props around a sense of what someone might have if they lived in a home like this, um, and some imperfections, I think would help bring this to life more. This is Flora. First of all, just really, really excellent sketch. It's clear that you put some real time and effort into this, and it looks great. Um, Also, it is the right idea for the kind of environment you want to build. It looks fleshed out, but it's not overly complex, so it's very doable. You just have to make one book, and then you can scale and in a bunch of different ways, and then put different textures on some of them, and you got all your books. You can repeat the picture frames. You can, you build one of these and you build the rest. More books. So it looks lived in, it looks fleshed out, but it also doesn't look too complicated to build. Um, and yeah, you have a nice sense of perspective in the drawing. So just a great drawing, right idea for environment, really good work. Let's take a look at the reference images. Um, yeah, I can see it. This looks pretty strongly pulled from this, which is good. It's good to have good references, and this can give you some ideas of lighting. Think of a lot of light coming from the window. I think that what you'll notice in this is there's a lot more props, and I think this table felt conspicuously empty to me. That doesn't mean you have to put a Christmas tree or whatever that is, but you could. But I would say that a little bit more clutter on this table would be a good idea. Maybe one or two more things over here in the drawing, and it just so happens that we will be modeling a chair not unlike this one, so you could put the chair in there because you'll be building one anyway. So yeah, really good reference, and that's funny. I think what's nice about this is it tells sort of a little story of someone falling asleep while watching TV. You get a kind of an idea of who the character is and what they like, from the props around. So I think what this has and the other one has less of is, things that define who this character is. There's a lot of books around. What kind of books? If you added a few more props, what kind of props would they have? What does this character do to spend her time? And I think that was true for the drawing. It's like, we don't, she's sitting and looking at her phone, but what kind of person is this and what should she do? And this one has a lot more kind of character and personality to it. It's really nice. And this is interesting from kind of just a lighting perspective. You have these very clear light sources. It looks like a miniature set or something. So really good, very good reference images. Excellent, excellent drawing. I think that my main point would be think about giving this character a bit more character. Who is she? How does she spend her time? What are her interests? You've got, I'm not sure what that is, a candle and headphones and a screen, and it's all fairly, I guess what's it call it, sort of generic. There's nothing that tells me that this woman in the image is different from anybody else, but maybe do stuff that kind of reveals her personality and try to get just a few more props around, especially this table. Like I said, feels kind of empty. Great work, though. This is Adania. Maybe you can help me. Let me know if I'm pronouncing your name right or wrong. Um, yeah, so it's a lab, and it's looking very sparse right now. And the thing is I think you could do things like vials or beakers are very easy to model. There's a thing called a revolve that you just have to do, like draw a curve that's the profile of the object, and then it kind of rotates around and makes the object. So, filling it up with lots of beakers and vials and that kind of stuff is a good idea. And anytime in an environment when you can repeat shapes is a good idea. So you could make a handful of these things and then scale them in different sizes and put them in different formats and that kind of thing. So right now it's looking pretty rough. It's looking pretty sparse. And the other thing is, again, this lab looks, you know, very, you might want to add a microscope, or I don't know. It looks very sparse, but it also, again, there's no story to it. You might think about what happened in this lab or what is going to happen in the lab. What are they studying? Are they studying something like infectious disease? Are they making super intelligent rats? Are they, you know what I mean? Like, come up with a little backstory for why this lab exists, and something interesting, different, surprising. Um, yeah, and here you go, exactly right there. Like when you do a revolve, all you have to do is kind of draw a curve that just goes like that, just that half of it, or like this, like just this profile curve, and then you do a revolve and you've built it. So, you could build all of these in less than 10 minutes very easily. So don't be afraid to kind of really flesh out and populate it. I like the stirring sticks is a nice addition. If you have things like Bunsen burners or little tubes connecting different vials, that's always kind of interesting. So yeah, this there's a lot more going on here, and it's very kind of sterile, clean, and perfect. I guess as a lab should be, but there's interesting stuff. This looks like some kind of adjustable, maybe robot arm or just adjustable arm. And that's interesting. There's this interesting kind of tube thing here that's a nice element. There's stacks of stuff on the shelves, a little bit more. These interesting little devices and the tubes connecting them. So, there's a lot to pull from here that I think you could flesh out your environment with. But even this reference image, I have no idea what they're studying there. I think it'd be interesting if you kind of make a decision. What kind of lab is it? And what's sort of interesting. What could give it a little backstory. This doesn't do too much for me for reference. Okay, so yeah, I think you could get more reference. I really think this needs to be fleshed out. It's looking very sparse and simple now. I think it is the right idea in that it's a limited environment, but think more about what's on the wall, what's on the shelves, are there doors and windows that we can see, those kinds of things. This is Craig, and I just wanted to read this. Here are my environment and prop sketches. I want it to be kind of clean looking laboratory on another planet. I didn't want it to be too modern, almost like the interior of a submarine with a porthole window. The prop is a toy looking ray gun. I'm going to flesh out the chair and some other elements a little more to follow up. And yeah, I see you got some interior reference here, like a submarine, which is good. So, yeah, I think this is good for that kind of not modern look. I like the all these things. I guess you wanted to be clean though, so I guess sort of a clean version of this. But there's a lot of interesting detail. I like the curve shapes mixed with the vertical and horizontal and squared off thing, and it really like a lot of variation of kind of rounded stuff, but also linear, and it's a great photo, really interesting. I have no idea what it is. This seems like not. It's almost like playing against type. It seems like you didn't want it too modern, and this looks almost like Tron or something like that. So um, yeah, and again, very very modern. So if you're going for that, let's call it steampunk space look, I think you probably don't want to look quite so modern. Yeah, good ray gun, and yeah, it has that feel. Some pieces that make it feel almost mechanical or hydraulic or something. Um, yeah, and that looks a bit more like a toy. That is a toy. Um, so yeah, this is an interesting mix. I like the sketch. It's a mix of the modern and the you know, I mean, this recalls the kind of submarine feeling, and you've got these sort of more modern shapes, and these tubes have that kind of submarine feel. So I think, yeah, maybe, more of the kind of tools and stuff. And I'm trying to decide if this kind of, I feel like there's this kind of Jetsons. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show The Jetsons. It was from the, I think, like the 1970s or 1980s. It was like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon where everybody lived in the sky, and it was very modern looking furniture and stuff, and it makes me think of that. And I feel like, if these are bolts kind of doing the window in, that a thing that had big pipes and bolts wouldn't have this sort of kind of what looks like a giant injection molded sort of desk. That's sort of a seamless shape. So I would say, maybe you can do interesting kind of sinuous shapes like this, but then maybe ground them by putting in some seams and bolts into it, so you get a little bit of those both those worlds married together. Yeah, very toy-like. In fact, it looks straight from one of the toys. Very good drawings, by the way. But I'm wondering, you know, can you take that and then um, adjust it so that while it recalls a ray gun toy, it looks a little bit more believable as an actual weapon. Um, and maybe, I mean, just coming up with stuff at the top of my head, like some kind of rifle stock or something, or some LED lights or something that gives a sense that there's like a power pack that has to be placed in and removed, or like as it's it's like as if it's like ammunition, like a, and maybe there's little like imagine sort of a battery pack that goes into the handle that has to be released, and there's like a release button here. I'm just making stuff up, but just if you thought of stuff that can kind of make it look less like a toy, more like a real thing, that might be nice. Um, yeah, and good reference. And I think it's these kind of bolts and support things and kind of what I would call construction history, showing how something is made out of its you know out of its different parts, the various bolts. It's always good to see things like seams when you can, although it's hard to see in this particular. But I'm seeing like things here, sort of weld marks. Um, I think you kind of see, if you look very closely, there's some seams around this panel here, little wall panels behind which there's other technologies. This like kind of threaded screw thing that opens and shuts the porthole door, and kind of the ridge around here. So all of that's you know good stuff to draw on. Nice reference image. Also good, and I think that if you're looking at something like this, getting that kind of detail is nice, and these kind of inlays here. Whereas the circles on your drawing were just really big, and I think get a better sense of scale like this thing has. And we're back to the beginning. So great reference to images, really good drawings. I think you've got some really good design elements there, and I think you can keep going and kind of really kind of add to that. I think you have a good starting point with where's the, it's taking its time. This one, but I think if the camera kind of is going to move into here a little bit more, we might see more of the detail here. So again, what is this desk mounted on? What sort of supports it? Give it that sort of sense of construction history with things like bolts and welded seams. Um, Give the chair some support. Maybe there's even like a gap in the floor, like underneath which the chair can kind of be moved around, the different space. Maybe there's additional, whether it's actual valves on the wall, or just other things that this chair needs to kind of, levers and switches and stuff that this thing chair needs to move around, and the the pilot or whoever's sitting in this chair has to adjust and control in a very kind of mechanical way. I think could be kind of cool. So I think really good start. I like the forms and shapes you're using. Really good reference. Just yeah, keep fleshing it out more. Okay, next up is Josh, and yeah, it's an appealing drawing. I feel like there are some scale issues with some of the things, like you could take anything you want as kind of a measuring stick, but um, to me the shingles look large um, for shingles. I guess it depends what kind of shingles, obviously, but in this case, they're as big as the head of this axe. Um, Maybe that's not a big problem. You might want to add some detail to the door, and I guess the other thing is just to keep in mind that if you're building the exterior of the house, that's fine, but you know if you ever want the characters to enter a house, you'll need to plan the whole interior. But I would say you don't need to do the interior of the house if the character is going to be outside the house at all times. The other thing is to think about, since you have a nice sort of drawing to begin with, it's pretty well designed. Although again, these lanterns look, the scaling looks wrong. It would probably help to have the character in here to sort of see how the character fits into this house. But yeah, fleshing out the door design, but also thinking about the house and how it sits on the land. Maybe there's some kind of stones that kind of lead up to the front door. Maybe we see some kind of growth here, or maybe there's some boulders around, or maybe there's other paths that lead to this house. What I want to avoid, however, is this sort of having to fill in this big distance and kind of having a horizon line here. So if you can kind of fill in the background, like maybe there's a little bit, maybe it's at the base of a hill or something, and there, or so that kind of fills in the background, so you don't have to sort of. To me, it looks like there's a great distance between here and whatever that is. I don't know, trees or something. I can't really tell, but like then if it's a big empty space, it's going to look kind of weird and computery. But if it feels like this house is sort of back up against a mountain or a hillside or something, then you can kind of fill that in with that, and you have a more kind of enclosed feeling space, which limits the amount you have to model and makes it more realistic to do this. Yeah, X prop reference looks fine. Pretty simple. For a tree, or we're not going to model trees, but we'll see that we later demonstrate something called paint effects, which allows you to kind of procedurally build trees. Big open field. I mean, yeah, I guess that's what we're seeing, that kind of big empty open field. But I guess you wouldn't just see a house just plopped in the middle of the field. There'd be pathways leading up to it. There'd be I don't know, whatever, laundry lines, or other stuff that kind of gives you the sense that it's lived in, and that someone's actually using that space. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't just plop it in the middle of the field and have nothing around it. So you might want to get some more reference that shows that if it's going to be in a field, that shows a house in that field. And I guess the trees themselves are blocking the horizon line, but then there's just big empty space, and I would look at um, I guess that is a house in the middle of a big empty field with nothing around it. So I still think you can see it looks like there's some kind of path leading up to it at the very least. But yeah, that is an extremely sparse environment. This is a nice touch. You could put something like that in the background. But I would say the typical like lived-in house, you're going to see a lot more around it. Are there children living there, and do they have recreational things like a swing or a slide or a trampoline? I don't know, or is it like I said, a clothesline could show that it's lived in, or maybe there's a garden, outside. So I just think about like who lives there, what are their outdoor activities, and then how can you show them, without going too nuts with it. But it looks, anyways. Yeah, I don't think this makes sense that there's nothing there, since it's clearly been abandoned for a long time. But with yours, it seems less. If this is lived in, there's currently an axe here. It makes me feel like this person regularly chops wood. The house isn't decaying or anything, so I feel like, okay, well, someone lives here. Who lives here? What kind of lives do they lead, and what do they do? And I think this axe and this, I guess that's a tree stump, are an excellent example of that. So that is a really good thing to have outside, but maybe fleshing out a little bit more, and maybe doing stuff to more enclose the space. I mean, maybe it's just a question of moving the tree line forward towards the camera, so it's just not leaving you so much of a big empty field to fill in. But yeah, nice drawing. This is William, and yeah, it's an interesting space. I think that the challenge of this is that it depends a lot on the kind of trees and vines and bushes, and I think that vines, to get them to kind of combine and twist and weave and pile on top of it, is not a simple thing to do. So I think that's going to be a challenge. I don't think it's impossible, but just something to think about and approach to. These columns, just look closely at, they're kind of smooth on the bottom half. If we maybe zoom in a little bit, you can see this bottom half is smooth, and then here you've got these kind of ridges in there, which I think will help bring that to life a little bit. The kind of brick stuff can be done with textures. Look at this kind of scale of the steps and stuff. Let's look at the Maya file. So I think overall you're doing a pretty good job of representing this. I think there's no reason why this cube needs so much geometry to it. It could just be, just a very simple cube just scaled up. I don't think you want all these extra divisions unless you're gonna, add detail on all those divisions. For the column, I mean, what you could try to do, you could have a separate top and bottom half, and what you could try to do is select every other one of these, and there might not be enough of these, but you'll get the kind of general idea. Oh, we don't have, oh yeah, we're there. And then now that those are all selected, I'll scale them in using this one, and whoops, and that could be sort of a simple way of getting those in. What you might want to do, let's see what happens if we do a cylinder. I'll make a new one. So I would let's scale this up, and maybe have a lot more of these subdivisions, so maybe like 60 or something. And then what if we selected every third, so you went 2 in between each. This will take a couple minutes. To select these, by the way, I just right mouse click, went to edge, and then and I'm holding down shift to select multiple ones. Hopefully this is going to work out. Yeah, seems like it. Let's scale those in using this guy. Yeah, that's better, see, because it kind of holds the shape a little bit. And you get that kind of ridged column shape a little bit better. Yeah, you can see what we're getting on the top. If we add some edges at the top and bottom to kind of hold the shape of the top, I can do that by Control Shift X will give you my, let's select the object first. Control Shift X will give you my multi-cut tool, and then I hold down Control, and I'll see the preview of where this extra edge is. I'll just put a nice extra edge near the top there, and then it still might mess that up a little bit. Yeah, maybe like another one. Yeah. And then you'd have to do the same at the bottom to hold the shape. Oops. I don't know why it's doing. Whoops. Just undoing. It's being funny. I'm just going to leave this tool and go back into it. Control Shift X. don't know why it's not wanting to let me put that edge in there. It's kind of odd. Oh, now it is. Alright, I don't know. Sort of weird, yeah. Okay. And now I did 3 for smooth preview, and I can see it kind of gives me this rounded look to it, you know. Maybe it was better just like that. I don't know. Anyways, that gives you some idea of how you might do. There's other ways to approach that, but that was sort of a quick and easy one as you get to that point. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, for these, don't add all these extra edges. And yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned using paint effects for stuff like trees and branches and stuff. There's probably some vines in there. But this is a much later module that we're actually going to get into modeling this, so I won't worry about it too much right now. Just quickly look at any other images here. Yeah, this is just the model that we were just looking at, so it's not really any additional information there. So, all right. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's an okay. You mentioned adding, some disrepair and vending machine and a sign, so that will help flesh it out. And you of course add the vases and some of the other stuff that you have here. Next up is Gwendolyn, and there's a lot of very cool images here. This is floating glowing orbs, nighttime, tree on floating island. So I think that while there's some beautiful and compelling images here that I really like, I think that one thing that concerns me about this idea is that you want to have a very limited sort of enclosed space. That doesn't necessarily mean it can't be outdoors. There's a way in this one, this image is sort of, you have this structure, but that is sort of completely surrounded by trees in the background, and so it feels like I said, that sort of limited space. That said, something like this is just, as an example, or that it's just too vast, with too much of an environment to build. So think of, more along these lines, ways to kind of enclose and limit the space we're looking at. I think that, the challenge with something like this is these sort of vine covered or moss covered, whatever it is, or grass covered, I don't even know what all the materials are. Yeah, I guess it's mostly grass, and little plants and stuff. I just think that's gonna be hard. Again, we can use paint effects for that, but it's gonna get really dense really quickly. So maybe a more simplified version of this, where you don't have to rely on the kind of grass covering everything. And plants everywhere. There's just quite a lot of geometry very quickly, which is going to become problematic. So if you could do something like that, a little simplified, maybe it depends more on sort of, rocks or large mushrooms or something like that, and depends a little bit less on all the greenery and plant life, where you're dealing with like millions of leaves and millions of blades of grass and that kind of thing, which just ends up being too much. But I think there's a theme going on and a style that's interesting. The glowing objects could be a nice kind of lighting element. So I like the character up on the tree. I think that's interesting. But then if you can find a way to kind of enclose and limit the environment, that's going to be good. But nice design stuff. This is Catherine, and it's a simple sketch, but again, I think that's the right idea in that it's a very kind of limited and enclosed space. So, I can definitely see, having enough room to work with here and limiting the amount of work you need to build it. This looks a little bit more sterile and modern. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but this has this kind of more naturalistic and, all the kind of natural materials and stuff. So a different feel. I'm not exactly clear which one you're going through, although it looks like a lot like this. So if you're just modeling this, seems very appealing to me. And again, any time you have repeating shapes in a environment, that's good because for example, you build one bookshelf and then you duplicate it, and you build one cabinet door and duplicate it. You build one chair and you duplicate it. So all of those things are lend themselves to making this achievable. I like the height. I think that's interesting. That's a cool chair. And again, that's a little more slick and modern, where the other thing felt a little more, I don't know, natural and older. So, uh, yeah, interesting table and wall art, different textures. And this again, this seems again a little bit more of a departure because it seemed like you had a sort of very modern look, and then you seemed like you had something a little bit more older feeling, a more natural feeling, and now you have something that's kind of just a little bit more kind of practical, typical home rather than any one extreme or the other. I think this is kind of neat. This idea of having the books organized by color, that could be a really nice thing to sort of give your set a look to it. And I like the very large book here on that. That's kind of a nice touch in the foreground. It's a nice design element. Yeah, really good reference images. I think can give you a lot of ideas. Overall, I think, the question becomes, it seems like you're pulling from a lot of different design sort of styles, and I think kind of making it a little bit more narrowed down to one or the other of which one of these. Is it someone who likes very modern furniture? Is it someone who likes natural materials? Is it someone who likes, kind of more manufactured feeling, polished materials, synthetic kinds of things, and then kind of, just imagine who would live there, what they would like, and then kind of design it around that. But really good reference and a nice drawing. Now this is Gordon, and I guess this is a portal of a space station. This corridor is, yeah, this is interesting, and it's got a lot of detail. And as I mentioned before, is if you can break stuff down into repeating pieces, it's a good strategy for an environment, because you just have to build the one section and then you just duplicate it several times, and can give you more space with kind of a feeling of a lot of detail, but without having to build as much. Okay, and a space pistol that looks interesting. It's got some interesting detail on it. It kind of feels like a mix of old and new. Oh, it looks like you're just pretty much taking it from this one straight up. Okay. I guess there's some modifications on it, but pretty close. Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of like, it looks like a 3D model in itself, and I tend to like to encourage people to draw their reference from reality rather than from other 3D models. Yeah, this one looks, I guess, it looks like this is what your sketch is taken from, and it's got a lot of detail on it, which is interesting, but it also has a pretty flat look to it. One thing I've noticed in real shots of space stations, which you can find loads of footage and stills of these days, is they look surprisingly crowdedly full of stuff. Um, yeah, you might look at some other reference, but again, you won't have time to model loads and loads of stuff either. So it's something to think about, except for when you can kind of repeat images. Is that all of them? Yeah, so I think this is leaving some to be desired. I think it's just very flat and it's just like a big cube essentially with some detail on the edges, and I think that finding ways to make it more dimensional like that. This one, where you've got a lot more going on, and stuff in the ceilings and the walls and different columns and stuff. It's a bit more appealing and an interesting area to work within. And it's a bit too flat and simple there. So those are just some thoughts. So I think you could flesh this experiment or more, think about more what props could be. So yeah, I think you've got some interesting props. I get to go with the bellhop character. I think that while this is a very clean drawing, I think that, yeah, we're looking for more detail and how you can kind of fill out that environment a little bit. When I'm looking at this reference, there's light fixtures, there's chairs, there's the molding, there's the whatever these panels on the bottom half. There's this table here with, I guess that's a vase with a flower in it. So I do see a lot of different details: ceiling lighting fixtures, more detail on the door panels. So I think there is a lot more you could do with the space than this very sparse drawing you have right here. So, and again, I think that picking a time period, the character is very stylized that you drew. So maybe the set is also very stylized, maybe exaggerated in height, or maybe some unusual angles, those kinds of things. You might think about, not everything is perfect 90 degrees to each other as a possibility. So, think about those ideas and think about giving the environment a style that matches the character and it has some exaggerations in the same way that the character is exaggerated. Um, so, yeah, the suitcases look interesting. So, yeah, all good ideas. I just think this isn't really giving me enough to work with to know what you'll be modeling. Like we were just going to say, I'm modeling that. You've got a lot more to work with there. I think this looks like a very sparse hallway, which is doesn't give you much to work with. So, yeah, think about a bit more of a fleshed out environment and what details you want to add, and then put that into your design. Okay, this is Taylor. I think that as far as an idea for the kind of environment we want to build, it's the right idea. It's a limited part of a space of a room. I think the sketch itself has some issues. There's a lot of perspective issues, a lot of kind of just messy, even scribbly lines, and it doesn't look like it got quite the care and attention it deserves. Like the windows aren't all on kind of on the same perspective line, and then they're maybe too many too close together, and there's no kind of detail of what happens when this large picture windows hits the floor, and there's some funny things with your perspective lines. I think part of what's challenging is this maybe looks like it's at an angle as well. So yeah, some drawing issues, although the overall idea of the kind of space you have is a good one. um, I would stay away from anything furry like this, though certainly some candles around can be interesting and add some interesting source of lights. Yeah, there's loads of detail on this kind of table, and that could be an interesting thing to build. I think some of this stuff gets, like all these little things, if they're going to be part of the model, would get kind of challenging, but you may be able to texture them on instead of modeling them. Yeah, decent reference for a couch. You look at the details, like how it's rounded here, but straight on this side. How the pillow kind of has that indent and curves out, so how it's sort of plump on top, but sort of straighter on the sides. So yeah, there's definitely some inspiration and stuff to work from here. Again, stay away from furry things, but again, the chair looks like the kind of thing you could do. So yeah, I think again, idea okay, sketch not great, but usable conceptually. Kind of refine this, maybe fix some of your perspective stuff, and yeah, again, it's one thing about a lot of the reference images in this drawing is it sort of looks like like sort of a showcased apartment that's not lived in, almost museum-like, and you might think about, well, what things could you do to make it more look like a lived-in space? I don't know, maybe there's some magazines laying out, or a television remote on the couch, or a plant in the corner, or I don't know, a little play structure for cats or something. Just kind of think about who might live there and what would they have, and what kind of tells a little story about who they are.